It's a huge honor today to talk to author Richard Lyons.
Yay!
That's quite the welcome. Thank you.
Absolutely. You deserve it.
You do a lot of grinding on the old typewriter in private, so you need applause every now and again.
Well, that's true. What I listen to while I'm writing, or when it's particularly hard, which would be the research end, I listen to Braveheart.
Ooh, I
the
love
soundtrack
that.
for
Yes.
Braveheart, and it gets me really riled up.
That's
to,
David's
to
favorite
get through
movie.
Everyone should
should
watch
be.
it at least once a year just to keep yourself sharp. Everything, I say it's the greatest romantic comedy of all time. People push back on that. And I'm like, there's some funny lines in there. Like, this is my island. The good Lord says I'll make
It's hysterical.
But there's great moments in there. The romance in it.
Yep.
It's a great story arc. Everything.
No,
that you need.
it has every key element. In fact, I sent some books to Mel Gibson, and I was asking his publicist how I send the books, and he goes, well, what are you trying to send? Is it a script or something? Because we're loaded with scripts. And
Right.
I said, no, it's literally a book about freedom. And he deserves it because of the great work he did.
Yeah.
I'd like to, and the guy scoffed a little bit. And I said, no, I'm being sincere. I'm literally penning a dedication to him because I thought his work was so important. And that William Wallace to the history of Scotland is a massive subject. When you talk about centuries later, the Scottish Enlightenment, and all the ideas that went into then transferred to America.
Totally agree.
So there's no way we're going to get everything out of you we want in this one episode. I want to highlight to people the DNA of Democracy is actually a series of 3 incredible works. No ways about. I like to read critics, and what do they say? There's a guy named Colin Newton who wrote a review of your book, and it was mostly really good and flowery. But he had this one line that jumped out at me. He says, "It's probably fair to call Lyons a fanboy of democracy." I thought that was an interesting line in his review, and I don't know how he meant it, but I would take it as a huge compliment. And I said in the introduction today, they throw out this phrase, Donald Trump's a threat to democracy. He's going to destroy our democracy. I don't know if they understand we're a republic, but you have the best understanding of anybody we can have on this screen of the history democracy, what it actually is about, and can actually counter that point. I think we need it more than ever when there's so many open socialists and communists running and gaining traction in the Democrat Party. It's been hijacked. I don't know if they can defend themselves from, it's almost like having your ankle hooked on a rope to a boat that's going off a waterfall. I don't know if they have the ability to even protect themselves from it. But where would you like to start with that context of democracy and specifically their claim that everything that's happening now threat to it?
Well, I would begin, I suppose, at the Constitutional Convention. If you go to the DNA of Democracy, which is volume 1 here, it goes through the history. It goes back to the 10 Commandments, the first common law of humanity. And why was that important? It was God's law on earth. And it was a gift to mankind. And it entailed the kings, priests, and commoners and prophets. Everybody had the same obligation to the law. Everybody under the law was equal. That was remarkable in human history. Human history is a tale largely of tyranny. Modern day tyranny is in the totalitarian state. It's in socialism. And I'll get to that in a little bit. But I go back to the history of the 10 Commandments where we start as being the light in the shadow of the Pharaoh, which was tyranny, and how the Israel in escaping slavery came under common law, which is a miracle, really, in human society. I then go to Greece and the Constitution of Athens, why that was extremely important, why the Acropolis as a marketplace and a plateau of ideas, that's where the Stoa was, of the philosophers. I then go to Rome and the 12 tables. What were that? Was property rights and the rights of commerce in Rome and individual rights to be able to bring cases in front of courts. I then go to the long evolution in England from the Magna Carta to the Civil War there to the Glorious Rebellion. The key points of all these histories end up in our Constitution. In 1787, and 55 representatives of 13 new states got together. They also brought all their library, the histories of all the ancient democracies. At the same time this was occurring, there was a thing called European tourism of the ancient sites, archaeological sites of Rome and Athens. So if you were a young nobleman, you would take this tour. So as they're unearthing the history of these glorious democracies and republics, we on our end in America are devising what would be the best form of government, a constitutional republic that separated powers so that we would never see a concentration of power or a tyranny vested in one person, like a Hitler or a Mussolini or a Mao or a Lenin. And you can see the contrast between Europe and ourselves in that. And you had just mentioned, when we had Washington after he was victorious over the greatest then standing army in the world, victorious over the greatest navy in the world, he had the power in himself to say, what? I'm going to be the power in this country. Instead, he went and gave his sword and resigned his office to the Continental Congress. In Europe, at almost the same time, you had Napoleon Bonaparte, who, in the wake of the revolution, became a greater tyrant than Louis XVI ever was. So wow. You have that contrast. That's how individual we are, how unique we are. And the miracle of the Constitution is that it left through the 9th and 10th Amendments localities alone. So if you were in an assembly in Boston, you had the right to speak your mind and you had the right to vote on every critical issue. It left localities alone. It left localities to educate their own children. This is extremely important. And then at the state level, through John Adams, and it was demanded that every state form its own constitution based on a republic structure. And so that was done, and that's why we have 50 states, all of which function as constitutional republics.
Can you tell us the difference? What is the difference between, and maybe the definition of democracy and a republic?
A democracy is what I just spoke of, which we're supposed to have locally. If I go to my town meetings, there you have a voice and a vote immediately. You're in the room where the vote is taken. The difference in a constitutional republic is that you have representatives that go to a separate assembly and are supposed to represent you. It also entails having rights against mob activity. I think Democrats want democracy. They would like to have a national vote that says, do we condemn Donald Trump and are we going to throw him in jail? And then they'd whoop everybody up. They'd use the media to propagandize and try and get their will through a mass vote. We are protected by that. We have a calmer form of government, a government based in law, not in passion.
Because you don't really hear a republic used very often. Democracy is what you mostly hear people talk about.
Especially on the left.
They use it to a purpose, but it's a genus term, right? And of which a republic is a species of that. It's a representative democracy.
And big moves taking place now. I think it's the new governor of, is it Virginia or Maryland? I think Virginia has passed legislation that regardless of what their state votes, they're going with the majority vote of the popular vote in the next election. Is not followed that directly, but if you're the thing that makes America unique, especially for people like us that grew up in a state like Kansas, we live in Missouri. There's a lot of people that live in rural California or even rural Oregon. Their vote should matter and not just be swayed by large population bases in New York, LA, Miami, Philadelphia thing. Those protections of the Electoral College was incredible foresight by the founders.
Yes.
But there seems to be a large constituency on the left that's trying to remove that and go with the mob rule of the large blue cities.
Exactly. And our constitutional republic is based, David, in federalism. And that is how we are able to expand as a country, comprehending 50 states and be able to agree on common things. But you can't agree on everything. The life of a fisherman in Gloucester is very different than the life of a lawyer in Dallas, Texas. And you want to preserve the differences in the country while allowing a common defense and common rights and common law. What they're trying to fashion in Virginia is say, well, let's forget about that. We want the urban vote to win whatever vote we're taking. The urban vote in all of America. That's what they're after. They want to get rid of the flyover states. And by the way, I love the name of your show. I love the name of the show. It's built in as
an insult. We'd embrace it as a compliment.
Exactly.
But did you see the map of the election when it was all red? The whole country was red, but by these slivers, the
little
West
cities.
Coast, East
I
Coast.
said we don't even have a blue state. We have blue
Exactly
cities. We have blue cities because county by county.
That's very well put.
Lean more towards we want less government, more freedom. But when you import millions of people that have never experienced freedom, Stacey played a clip yesterday of a pastor in Alabama named Robin Bullock, and he drew this analogy, and we've made it similar ones ourselves, where An eagle taken from captivity and put in a cage thinks and behaves and rebels against the cage different than a eagle that was born in a cage and has never experienced. Zookeepers experience that. And the people in those, the predominantly red areas you see on the screen right now, lean more towards what? I'd rather decide what happens with my money. I want to decide how my children are raised and what medications they take or are forced to take. Marxism says what? Nothing really is yours. It all belongs to the state. You're simply a steward currently of these assets. And that's where it divides is, are we a free people or are we cattle in the field to be led by a farmer in the house?
I would make a comment on that, if I may. This is the second volume of the series, it's Shadows of the Acropolis. And where it begins is with the presidency of Woodrow Wilson. And why was he important? It's because he was a devotee of Friedrich Hegel's ideal state theory, which is that we as individuals have to give up our rights to the ideal state because that is a higher living entity. The individual means nothing. The individual should serve as part of the state. And that's when Woodrow Wilson formed the administrative state of our country, which is an unenumerated power within Washington, D.C. Why it's important is because if you have an ideal state, you end up with Mussolini's and Hitler's as your leader, based on the great man theory, that a great man will come along and everybody has to give up their rights to his greater idea and to the ideal state that he runs, he or she. And it is antithetical to our Constitution. Our Constitution is based on individual rights and common law. Ideal state theory is based on whatever the masses determine en masse is the will of the state, and whatever the will of the state, you are subject to. So there is nowhere to hide, and that is the basis of socialism.
Okay, so a quick question,
and that is why, when Obama was in power, he always referred to the Constitution as being a charter of negative rights. What he's expressing is it is because individuals have rights, government doesn't. Government doesn't have the right to invade your rights as an individual. And so and that's why they talk about, well, it's a living constitution. It's because they want to change it. It's because they want to kill it.
So the question I have for you about that is, obviously go back before Obama and you see the Republicans and you see the Democrats, and it seemed like that there was a love for the country and had differences, but they love the country, not trying to destroy the country. Now you see today where what's happening in New York with Mamdani, it's socialist, it's communism, it's this Islam takeover that we're seeing, but it's not just happened in New York. Now it just actually happened in Colorado, where truly, like, you have a barista that is extreme radical left and has unseated somebody that's been in there for, I don't know, a few decades.
Bartenders and baristas, that's the move.
Where do you see this going?
Well, I do like a good coffee, but it shouldn't be put in Congress, a person who can make it. It used to be, here's where I see the problem. And you're exactly right, Stacey. We have gone from a Democrat Party with which we were on common ground up until 1965 or so, when they started with OBJ and the Great Society doing this massive redistribution of wealth throughout the country and invading families, invading family rights, to the destruction of the African American family. And so the problem is we used to have common ground. If you put it on a football field, we used to agree on everything between the 40-yard lines. And part of that was you defend the country, you defend and serve the Constitution, you revere the Constitution, right? They don't do that anymore. We used to believe in our military. They don't want the military, they don't want ICE, they don't want a police force. They want a mob. They want a mob. And they don't want individuals to have rights. They want whatever governing authority to have all the rights.
So looking as a historian, where does this go?
Business.
Looking at this, where do we go in the future?
We are at, and these are interesting times, and we need to accept the challenge that we're at a Y in the road. We are at a Y in the road. It's been growing for 100 years. Socialism. It's been able to grow because the Democrat Party never said these are socialist policies, right? But if you look at the socialist plank in the election of, I think it was 1928, socialists only got 1% of the vote, but their plank, all the policy that was in their plank was affected in America by 1977, which included progressive taxation, state benefits of health care, Social Security, these sorts of things, redistribution of wealth. A lot of the socialist plank has been already affected, but the Democrats had to hide it. The difference now is They are coming out and saying, we're socialists. And what the problem is that the Democrats who do believe in common ground with the rest of America are not defending themselves. They are endorsing the socialists, which if the socialists don't get their policies passed by process, if they don't win elections, they try and affect the same thing through violence. And that's where you get the BLM riots of 2020. It's where you get burning the flag in LA over ICE, where you get sanctuary cities and states, which is anathema to the idea of a constitutional republic based in common law. You can't have sanctuaries where criminals can run riot. It's not constitutional.
I remember it's a turning point for me. There was an MSNBC host. I believe she was playing a clip of maybe Ted Cruz talking about our rights come from God. And they came back to the panel. She goes, these people have lost it. They their rights don't come from the government. They think their right. She's like, their rights come from God. Like, these are radical.
The single greatest line in the history of freedom is that line in the Declaration of Independence, that we are endowed by our Creator with inalienable rights. And that turns everything upside down. If the state doesn't have a right to invade your rights, then you're free. If it's the reverse, you're not.
And that's fundamentally where we're at. But I got to come back to, you always like, how do we get there? Like, if you saw a couple dating and they're at the table and the guy's saying, I like to sleep around a lot, but I'd love to marry you. And she's like, that sounds great. You're like, how would you get there? Because like, say a guy does that, he's typically going to keep that. He's going to keep that. Now they're openly saying, what? Socialism, we want communism. America's bad. I wipe my hands. I would use the flag as a napkin. They're saying these things on the first date and gaining traction. What is to the point where that's not something they would hide? That's something they campaign on. Is it in my mind? I go back to early, married 33 years. I remember early when we're coming out of school. I'd say if you had a cancer scan of our country, the place that would show up as cancer spots is everywhere there's a major university, because that's where like the Marxist strongholds. But now it's gone from colleges down to kindergartens all the way through. Is that the main source, or is there something else that I'm missing? Do we teach our attorneys and our teachers to perpetuate the idea that America is evil and that we need to burn it down and have a Marxist utopia? Is it simply just teaching them that allowed this to take place?
Well, again, David, began in the 1960s with LBJ, and it's metastasized, and it got altogether different during Obama when he determined that the government would finance higher education as a monopoly, right? And if you'll notice, since then, college education, the price has doubled, and what they're teaching is not history, it's indoctrination, right? Yes. But this goes all the way back to Woodrow Wilson again. Woodrow Wilson was a proponent of ideal state theory because it had been in vogue in European universities in the late 1800s. And he brought it to the presidency. And at the same time that he was saying, he said this famously. He said the Bolsheviks did it wrong. They have done it by revolution, trying to create socialism. We in America will do it quietly and incrementally through evolution, and will achieve the same end. That was 100 years ago, and we're there now. Because from Woodrow Wilson, it goes to FDR, metastasize the administrative state, also increase the income tax and redistribution, then LBJ, then Obama, and then to where we are today. The Biden administration was the closest we've come to socialism, with DEI, CRT, the denouncing of our heritage, the tearing down of statues. This is all socialist stuff that's in our face now. It's not being done in dark rooms where we can't see it. It's in our face.
So we're seeing this a lot with the Gen Z men, the guys, versus not necessarily as much as the women, but where they are really starting to, it seems like they're a lot more patriotic. I don't know if you've seen, but they've been taking the flag from California to Washington, D.C. and carrying it all along the way. They're running. And it's supposed to be in Washington, D.C., I believe, tomorrow. And so it's pretty exciting as you watch this. And these are these young men, some women, if you can see it there, some women as well. But the
hope of America, right?
I say,
well, it started with 5 guys.
Yep.
And after they left the borders of California, none of those 5 guys have actually had to hold the flag. There's been somebody waiting for them at every rural road all the way through Kansas and every
Nebraska.
That's a great story.
They'll be in D.C. by the 4th. They're all great students of Roman history. That seems to be a big movement among young men. But go ahead.
As I'm looking at that, I'm extremely encouraged by when you're looking at this generation, men and women in some ways, because you look at like even some of the women, they've gone back to canning, they've gone back to sewing, crocheting, things that like my generation and maybe even the millennials were like, nah, I don't want to have anything to do with that. This generation's like, maybe we do want to go back to more of our roots. Where do you see this going in the future, especially if they're not educated in our college systems?
Well, what I saw, this is a beautiful story. And is that America or what?
Yeah.
That's really American. Again, we're at a Y in the road. And they're saying that we have an evil history. The fact is, we have the most unique history of all histories, of all nations. First of all, we threw off the yoke of tyranny and created our own country. How unique is that in itself? Where everybody, speaking of women, Abigail Adams, Sarah Hutchinson Jackson, there are women throughout the colonial period who literally had to run their family business, had to run their family farm, had to raise the kids, take care of the school, take care of the church, while their husbands were fighting on the front lines at risk of their lives. And the story of Sarah Hutchinson Jackson is so exemplary and saddening because the Waxhaws battle spilled over into her land, and the British Army literally was in her house sabering her sons who were 14 and 16.
Oh my gosh.
Then they were hauled off to a prison 40 miles away in Camden. They were in the prison and they got Robert, I think his name was, got smallpox, and Andrew got malaria in the prison. While the mother was outside pleading, can we please get my sons out of there? They're underage. They weren't even in the fight. We were at home. We were defending our home. So they finally do a prisoner exchange and she gets her two sons back. And on the 40-mile route home, there's a terrible storm. And Robert, who was literally tied to the horse he was on, died. And Andrew, when he got home, was told by his mother, son, I have to go to another prison because your cousins are there. And I have to try and get them out. She died along the way of smallpox. The sole survivor of the family, Andrew, was Andrew Jackson, our 7th president.
Whoa!
What a story.
But you feel for that. That's a woman of the revolution.
Yep.
Who fought. Yeah. She lost her eldest son in the battle. I think it was Harper's Ferry or Bryant's Ferry. She lost her eldest son and then lost her second son. And her third became the sole survivor of the family.
What a great story. Wow.
But that's one. That's only one story of our revolution. But even a greater story is there in the Civil War, because there was a compromise to hold the 13 states together until the country could mature enough that it could handle the rebellion that would be coming over slavery. They knew it. Benjamin Franklin, his last cause throughout the end of his life was ending slavery. And of course, much of the North did at the time of the Revolution. But we had to fight a civil war for 4 years at the cost of 1 million casualties. And that does not enter into all the parts of America that were burned to the ground, all the commerce and businesses lost, all the families affected. We had to suffer that to bring that line to bear in our Constitution that all men are created equal. We had to suffer that in this country. No other nation on earth has ever done such a thing, that the majority race, for the sake of a minority race, goes to war with itself at such a cost to change how they are governed. Mm-hmm. It's utterly unique to the history of America, and people ought to appreciate it. That's what I would call virtuous.
So good.
You have to go to great lengths to study world history and specifically U.S. history and come up with the negative narratives that lead the Democrat Party and the majority of American educational institutions today. You have to go through it. I saw Libs of TikTok put out a clip yesterday of there's a pastor, and he went to this whole thing of Jesus was probably bisexual.
Oh my god!
And with this whole thing, I'm like,
how do you get there?
I'm like, how do you read this book? And I need a whiteboard. How do you come up with this? You have to like do some major mental gymnastics to come up with these odd theories. And they've done that with our history, where, man, we should be the story that sold us, hey, this is what's possible for mankind. This is the best version of what man's capable of. That's the clip. He looks like the dude that would probably come up with that theory. But you have to go to great lengths to do it, to study our history. And again, the loss of 500,000 lives fighting for it on behalf of the Union, to not celebrate what America has done in the world. And that's why I love your work, because it makes it impossible to miss.
But that example of liberating populations from tyranny and slavery in America was tyranny. You had a split society in the South. But that example of liberation led us to Europe in World War II, to free Europe of Mussolini and Stalin, and to contest the Soviet Union throughout the Cold War. It is part of our heritage, and it's a virtuous heritage.
I love it.
And let me make this remark about that pastor, whoever the living hell that guy is.
Yep.
But that is part of the socialist program to divide America in any way that they can, whether it's having a family member that they're indoctrinating at college and they're telling the poor kid, if your family's not on board with socialism, you have a right to hate them. Family should be above politics.
Yep.
Yes, always.
That's right.
Marriages and families, they're up here. Faith is way up here.
Yep.
Right? Governance is down here. It's keep the streets clean. Make sure we live by the same rules of common. Make sure our streets are safe. You don't have to invade my family, and you don't have to divide it.
Oh, that's so good, Richard.
As we wrap up, you have the 3 books. One of them is available. If people go to the DNAofdemocracy.com, first of all, smoking hot website.
This is a great looking website.
It's unbelievable. And they can sign up there, register, and get your first book free as a PDF right now if they go there. And I think that's good through the month of July. Is that correct? And the audio version as well?
It is. Yes, there's the digital and audio. So you could take it on a car trip this summer with your kids and just listen to it roll. And that is in honor of the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence and our utterly unique history. People should love this history and not be driven away from it. Embrace it. We are a great nation and a guide to other nations in how to form themselves based on individual rights, the rights of families, the rights of property, the rights of commerce. Ours is a very special nation, and anybody who would denigrate it literally has the intellect it takes to be a barista.
Oh, that is so good.
It's good. People can follow you on X at DNA of Democracy. Encourage them to do that. We'll have the links down below. The show goes on 60 different platforms. So whether you're on Apple or Spotify or Rumble or wherever you're listening to this episode, in the notes below, there's going to be links to be able to get a hold of Richard. Follow his work. Unbelievably generous in having a passion of we need, like I said in the beginning, we need the limes for the sailors because they have scurvy. And the missing ingredient for them is a knowledge of our history and where we came from, what makes us unique, what makes us special. You'll have the same view of our country that you had of it during when the guy had his teeth knocked out in the Olympics and we won the gold. It's like that moment. That's a meme of what your books create and what your writing creates in the hearts of Americans. An awareness and a love of self and what makes us great.
And before we actually let you go, can you just tell our audience on your website, how do they actually buy the book? If they're like, okay, I would like to get a hard copy of it. So obviously you're giving away the email and the audio, but they want a hard copy. How do they do that real fast based on your website?
Well, you could do it at richardclyons.com. There is a link to a store, and you can go to the store through that. Okay. And also, or go to lilia.com, or it's on Amazon or anywhere books are sold if you ask for them.
Perfect. Richard, thank you so much for coming on today.
We got to get you back
Thoroughly
again.
Enjoyed this conversation.
Oh, I loved it. And no, as Americans, people ask me, what's my reward for doing this? I said, I've already got the reward. I'm an American. That's a blessing.
Come on.